All right, good. So it sounds pretty good. It's a little bit echoey, but that's Bluetooth for you. I stupidly bought a phone that only has Bluetooth. Oh, I guess I could probably plug in a microphone via USB-C. I never thought of that. I'll have to look that up. But neither here nor there. What I thought today I would share is I'm currently reading the book by Nicholas G. Carr called The Shallows. What the internet is doing to our children or doing to our minds. I can't remember exactly. It follows on the heels of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. I find it interesting because he talks about Nietzsche and Marcia McLuhan. So again, perfect for me to talk about. But rather than just, read a very simple script, I'm actually going to share with you how I use AI. In this case, it was just to improve my responses, my thinking, right? Because I've told you my writing is terrible. Most of my teachers just ignored how unique and weird my writing was. So I've had to learn how to write myself. And obviously it's not that great. So what I asked, this is ChatGPT 4, I believe, I said, evaluate my response to the book, The Shallows, by Nicholas G. Carr. His insights in his blurb says, building on the insights of thinkers from Plato to McLuhan, Carr makes a convincing case that every information technology carries an intellectual ethic, a set of assumptions about the nature of knowledge and intelligence. He explains how the printed books serve to focus our attention, promoting deep and creative thought. In stark contrast, the internet encourages the rapid, distracted sampling of small bits of information from many sources. Its ethic is that of the industrialist, an ethic of speed and efficiency, of optimized production and consumption. And now the net is remaking us in its own image. We're becoming ever more adept at scanning and skimming, but what we are losing is our capacity for concentration, contemplation, and reflection. Okay? So before I proceed, this is separate from what I actually wrote. I've continued reading his book and I've continued to work on my thoughts. So let me just point out what I'm getting at here. Over and over again, they keep talking about a loss of focus. Okay? And they keep, again, Jonathan Haidt blames the cell phones. Nicholas Carr blames the internet. Marianne Wolf blames that we're not doing deep reading. But what do all these have in common? The real problem is that reading teaches focus. As Marianne Wolf said, we're natural speakers, natural listeners, right? We're storytellers, we're listeners. But reading is a skill we have to tack on to us. So as I've said before, we don't learn algebra so we can all become algebraists when we grow up. We learn algebra to develop these minor folds in the brain to make us better thinkers, make us more of an individual. So we read books, as Schopenhauer said, so that we can live more experience, right? Because we can only live one lifetime, but via books, we can experience so much more. So I argue all of these researchers are wrong because they're glazing over the real problem here. If the problem is a loss of focus, of deep engagement with material, with knowledge, with whatever, with media, right? Because I've shown this myself. I deeply engage with audiobooks. And all of these researchers argue, well, that would leave me at a disadvantage when I think I've shown, if you follow my podcast for the last 5 years, I think you have seen a steady progress, particularly in the last 2 years, of my ability to track these ideas in books, right? I've become more literate, but at the same time fluent, something that I was deathly short of. I was arguably even functionally illiterate, literate in ways that I could pass, right? I told you this before. When you do an advanced IQ test, they're not actually testing deep reading. You're reading very simple passages. And for a high functioning dyslexic, you can actually cover how bad your reading and your reading comprehension is. But long story short, reading is focus. We teach our kids to read, yes, so they can get more information. They can grok the data from books and from the world around us. But most importantly, reading teaches focus. And if reading is a skill, then why are we not continuing to develop that skill? In a day when 90% of people are reading less than a book a year, why are these researchers blaming it on a phone or on distractions or on we're not deeply engaging because it's the internet's fault, when it's obvious to anyone who's paying attention, the real issue here is we're not practicing deep engagement, deep focus. And in fact, this is how this has come full circle for me, right? I began this journey to try to heal trauma, but what I've ended up doing is discovering that until we learn to read, we're not going to heal anything, right? So here we are. Reading is focus. Focus is power. Power is knowledge. Knowledge is wisdom. And wisdom is what we're all aiming for here. But I'll continue on my original response that I asked AI to evaluate. So I said my response, and this is more, I read my actual response. Now I'm just giving it, I read, what do you call it? The blurb from the book. Now I'm just going to give it a little more a prompt as to what I'm looking for here. I said, my response, pay attention that I disagree with him. That's Nicholas Carr. And Marianne Wolf, that it is not skimming, but the lost focus. This can be on reading, or I point out especially important for listening, a skill we have in abundance, versus reading as a learned one. Yet we are losing both. We need to leverage audiobooks, as they also build the focus needed to read and, more importantly, comprehend. So as I said on my walk in a voice note, the problem here isn't that we're short on reading skills or short on IQ, as some of these researchers will go down. The problem is we're not engaging deeply with this material. Mortimer Adler explained this. He warned this was going to happen. If you read a book once, you haven't read the book. Right? And that's what we're running into today. Nicholas Carr and Marianne Wolf both talk about how the hyperlinks distract people. Well, yes, because people need to learn how to stay focused, right? That's the entirety of this. And so I argue that, yes, to many people, focusing on an audiobook is much harder than a physical book, because a physical book, you're almost forced to focus and pay attention, whereas an audiobook, you must develop that focus and mindfulness. I've talked about my protocol and how I got there, but I truly believe that as much as my reading and listening protocol helped, I think my special insight into mindfulness and too long didn't read is the West isn't teaching it right? Mindfulness is sati sampajanya. It is to develop this focus, this awareness, this presence. Yes, you usually begin on a cushion, right? Because it's the easiest way to develop this focus. But you carry that focus off the cushion into everyday life. And if you don't, well, you've just wasted your time. And in the West, they tend to teach it as a cushion practice rather than a constant vigilance of focus. Right? So here's my response that I asked it to evaluate. I said, and it's a response to someone who did a video about what's going on right now. They're talking about how elite post-secondary students cannot read. So they're thinking of doing what we did up here in Canada when they said that some students couldn't do maths. They just removed the need to do maths. So if you can't do maths, the solution is to learn to do maths. If you have students coming into school that cannot read, the solution isn't to not require them to read. The solution is to teach them to read. I mean, come on. Seriously. What was the example I almost forgot about before I broke I was fidgeting with my pen and I broke the little clip. What was it? Oh, yes. I was going to give an example of a professor who teaches at a university. He's a well-known professor. I mean, I won't say how he's held. Some people think he's a wonderful, wonderful thinker. Other people think not. I think he's a great thinker. He's just very biased, as many are. He told a story about his students. It was a shock. So his co-host asked him, "Oh, okay, so school year's starting up again. So what's going on this year?" And he said, Well, my students are going to be coming back, and he started telling stories, and he started laughing at his students. And why? Because he said they couldn't write an essay. He admits that he knows they're coming from high school not being able to write an essay, but does he teach them how to write an essay? No. No, he laughed and just said he's going to do the same thing he always does, and he's going to assign the essay, assign the work, and just laugh at them when they fail, rather than teach them how to do. It's so sad. Same can be said for a lot of educators, right? If I mention how maybe, as example, there's a school district that 95% of students are failing to present at the expected levels, right? They're not reading, they're not doing math at their grade level. But 99% of the teachers have been rated as exception, right? Or at least, not failing to provide the education. So if we have standards and they're not teaching the standards, if our students are 95% are failing, again, I talked about this before this new data, right? When they said 80% of high school graduates can't read at a high school level. Fast forward to today, it's 100% in some areas, and maybe even worse. And think about this. You may have high-functioning students. I've talked about my theory that I think we should have high-functioning students work with challenge students, right? So it can actually help the high-functioning students to have a little more challenge, and the students that are having more challenge, instead of the teacher having to give. Like I said, there was an author who suggests that the solution to this failure of education is to provide as close to one-to-one teacher-student as we can. Like, that is ridiculously insane to believe that that is our way out. Our way out is through. And what that means is not ignoring that our children can't read, not ignoring that our children can't do math. It's figuring out why. Right? And it's harder now today, I believe, because we've let it go so long that even our teachers are having difficulty reading, doing math, and understanding. Because I saw this working in the bank. Your average person can't do even basic math nowadays. Basic logic is beyond. And again, I'm being bombastic. Please don't get upset. But it really is that common. You'd be surprised. If you're sitting there, well, obviously you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you weren't already a thinker. But if you're sitting there thinking, no, I don't think. Remember, people hide this very well. But I digress. So my response that I asked for an evaluation of is at 340, they were talking about something specific. I said, they're paying hundreds. Oh, I remember what this was. So this is a student in the Peterson Academy, and he's reviewing the courses. And he just told me that he's doing some of the early courses that were, I guess, with the pre-launch. And they had quizzes of 10 questions at the end, which I thought was ridiculous. Like, 10? Really? Come on, tell me you're not really trying to educate someone. Oh, really? This is supposed to be a new paradigm for education, and they seem to be failing in the same way. But the student says that, oh, well, some of the newer courses only have 5 quizzes. And he says he thinks because people aren't doing these quizzes. So this was my response. I said, they're paying hundreds for an education, but you think they're not doing the quiz. I saw that in Baltimore, they had 0 kids that could do math. It used to be 60% could not do math at their grade level. 80% could not read at their grade level. I wonder if they need to teach reading first. I know a prof that admitted in his podcast that and so I explained actually what I told you before. I think the disconnect might be deeper. Marianne Wolf, a leading researcher on reading, thinks we are natural listeners, but we must learn to read. I believe this disconnect is from not realizing we need to work on a skill like reading. And that is the hurdle we need to jump. What I meant by that is that we need to learn, but also maintain it. We have a world of literate people like never before, but fluency is so rare that even teachers are failing to grok the plot. I'm reading The Shallows, a book by Nicholas G. Carr, what the internet's doing to our brain. And the takeaway is, it's not what not reading is doing to our brains. Sorry. The key takeaway is not what the internet is doing to our brain. It is what not reading is doing to our brains and our humanity. See how I'm a bit of a spaz when it comes to the writing, right? I'm all over the place. So this is what AI said when I asked for an evaluation. It says, your response touches on several important points, but the structure and clarity can be improved to make your argument more compelling. Here's an evaluation and some suggestions for refinement. Strengths. Disagreement with Carr and Wolf. You make an interesting and valid point that it's not just about skimming, but rather the loss of focus. You also bring up listening as a critical skill that is being neglected, which is a fresh angle on the topic. Real-world examples. The example of education in Baltimore, where students struggle with basic math and reading, adds a concrete dimension to your argument, emphasizing the severity of the problem. Connecting reading and listening. So your point that audiobooks can help rebuild focus and comprehension is insightful. Highlighting the connection between listening and reading skills opens up a broader discussion on how technology can both harm and help cognitive abilities. Yes, this is a big thing that I talk about, that we just need to change our relationship with phones, change our relationship with AI. We don't need to ban phones. We don't need to ban AI. It's us. So areas for improvement, it says. So clarify the core argument. Your response is a bit scattered, jumping from point to point. And again, it was point form. It might be helpful to first clearly state your disagreement with Carr and Wolf and then systematically explain your argument. I guess I could just say they think it's, skim reading, right? Jonathan Carr, he builds on Marianne Wolf's idea, but it's plain. They think that we're not engaging deeply with the material, and they blame that on the internet and skimming reading and all this stuff, when really it's simple. The problem is we're not reading. That's it. We need to read more, period, right? So it says, for example, Carr and Wolf argue that the internet is harming our ability to focus and read deeply. I agree with their concerns, but believe the issue is not just about reading, but about focus in general, whether reading, listening, or engaging with information in any medium. Yes, you're right. Yes, I did mention that I believe, as I've said before, if we take proper mindfulness and meditation, which would be the act of being mindful in everything you're doing, like for right now, I'm just thinking about the podcast, right? I'm not thinking about tea later or washing dishes. When I wash the dishes, I'll think about washing the dishes. When I'm recording the podcast, I'll think about recording the podcast. And that's where we'll stay. And that develops this focus. As Carr says in his book, The Shallows, it's been disproven that multitasking is not a thing. No matter how good you get at multitasking, all you're doing is denaturing your focus, denaturing your skills. Because really, truly, what we should be doing is focusing wholeheartedly on one thing. Right? So it goes on and says, support your claims. You mention a professor who mocks his students' writing abilities, but this anecdote could be more effective if you relate it directly to your main argument. You could tie it back to the idea that students aren't being taught fundamental skills like writing, because educators themselves may not fully appreciate the cognitive demands of literacy and focus. Or I could just say what I said, that the real problem is many of these teachers, I believe, fail at these basic skills and thus are unable to teach them. So, right, I think as it is with many other areas, I think the professor laughing is covering his discomfort of the truth. As Jung says, what you dislike in others tends to be what you dislike in yourself. So I'm guessing, like many other people I run into, that they're just as bad as the students and they just won't admit it, right? What I ended up having to admit is this: I didn't have the skills to get by in everyday life. I had to learn how to read and write and think, because the world was just it's kind of like what Helen Keller said, that it actually opened the world up when she learned language. And that's what people need to understand. You feel trapped in a prison. But what's crazy, it even relates to my Gita course this weekend. My professor talked about this. It's just the realization that you have been trapped. You never knew, right? Think of it like you're in a big mansion, right? And you have all these rooms and everywhere you can go. And it's wonderful until you realize that you're locked in. Right? Yeah, you never had any wish to be outside of your box until you realize that you're limited to within that box. Right? It's almost like a reverse Schrodinger's cat, this idea that you have no idea that you're in the box until you do. And once you realize you're in the box, that's all you can see. Right? And the way out is to, well, in that case would be to find a way out of the house or accept your limitations. I mean, yeah, I think I've taken this to the limits of it. So it says, refining your conclusion. The conclusion of your response can be stronger and clearer. Rather than stating the takeaway is, it is not what, the takeaway is, it is what not reading is doing to our brains and humanity. You might rephrase it as, the real issue isn't just that the internet, the real issue isn't just what the internet is doing to our brains, but what our loss of focus, whether in reading, listening, or critical thinking, is doing to our ability to engage deeply with the world around us. And so it gave me a suggested response. So rewriting my whole, thesis statement. In The Shallows, Nicholas Carr argues that the internet is eroding our ability to concentrate and think deeply. And while I agree with many of his insights, I believe the issue runs deeper. Carr, along with reading expert Marianne Wolf, suggests that our habit of skimming and scanning is to blame. However, I believe the core issue is not skimming, but a broader loss of focus, affecting not just our reading, but also our ability to listen and engage fully. Listening is a natural skill, but even this is being compromised in the age of constant distraction. Take education, for example, the situation in Baltimore, where many students struggle with basic reading and math, highlights a larger systemic issue. I know of college professors who openly mock their students' inability to write, yet they fail to teach these basic skills. This shows a disconnect between the assumed literacy of our population and the actual fluency required to deeply understand and articulate ideas. Audiobooks, I believe, offer a potential solution. They can help rebuild the focus required not only for reading, but also for comprehension and critical thinking. As Carr points out, our brains are being reshaped by how we interact with information, but I argue it's not just the internet doing the damage. It's our neglect of focus, whether in reading, writing, or listening, that is eroding our capacity for deep thought and ultimately our humanity. Yeah, it was better. Did a better job. It says, this revised version tightens your argument, directly addresses Carr's and Wolf's points, and provides a more coherent structure to response. Right? So this is what I'm saying. You can't use AI to give you the answers, but you can help it shape your own ideas to make them more understandable, more palatable, more salient, whatever you want to say. So I went on and I said, can you put this into a thesis for education reform to teach listening and reading both? So it said, here is a statement. So here it is. In order to address the growing cognitive challenges posed by modern technology and declining attention spans, education reform must prioritize the dual development of listening and reading skills. While traditional literacy programs emphasize reading as a learned skill, they often overlook the natural yet diminishing capacity for deep listening. By integrating comprehensive curricula that focus on building sustained attention and comprehension in both listening and reading, we can equip students with the focus and cognitive flexibility necessary for deeper learning, critical thinking, and effective communication in the digital age. I would add to that, this being a day later, I would argue that listening is important, but I've come to this understanding that we learn to read because, as Carr says in his book, when we began to read privately, not out loud, it allowed for more introspection, as well as allowing us to go into other areas that we normally wouldn't even consider. So I asked for a scripted podcast. That's what I've been doing the last couple of weeks. I go and do all this research, interact with the AI, and then I usually let it summarize it down to a script. I got to read it directly today. Usually what I do is I'll read a section and then, talk a little bit or add on to it or adjust it. Because believe it or not, the podcast where I just read verbatim just didn't seem to have the popularity as, believe it or not, as the podcast where I just ramble on and on and on. I've had a lot of complaints that I tend to digress, but I think it has to do with attention span, because I'm one of those weirdos that I will digress, but after say 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, it ties right back to the initial insight, right? So it's difficult, right? It really is difficult, because what I'm realizing is there's very few people like me who have the ability to be able to remain focused on a long speech, right? Like a TED Talk. With their, up to 25 or 30 minutes in, you can still remember some of the things they initially said, right? But here, so, hey everyone, welcome to the podcast where we discuss the future of education and how we can better equip students for the modern world. Here's a funny little aspect of the AI. It acts as if you're starting up a new podcast every time you ask it for a script, right? It doesn't have the memory to remember that, hey, I've been working with you for years here, but no. You have to prompt it to tell it what to remember. Otherwise, it's just going to remember useless sort of info. And it'll just give you, in this case, it says, hello, or it says, hey, everyone, welcome to the Learning Shift, where we discuss the future of education and how we can better equip students for the modern world. I didn't ask for a name. It just came up with that. And I know where it's coming from. Learning Shift, right? To change. I just think it sounds campy, but. So it goes on. It says, today I want to dive into a topic that's increasingly relevant but often overlooked. How education can reform to teach not just reading, but listening skills as well. So that's where it failed. I'm talking about reading as technically how it can create better thinking. So this is why I just, kind of threw this script out. But I thought it would make an interesting podcast to share how I use AI in research, as well as, well, actually for the last little while in the podcast, right? I like to use it as a foil, right? I specifically prompt it to be very critical and challenge me on my ideas. So it says, the script goes on. It says, we all know the world is changing. The internet, social media, and endless digital distractions are shaping how we think, how we process information, and how we interact with the world around us and each other. And while we've heard a lot about the impact this has on our attention spans and ability to focus, one area I believe we're neglecting is how we teach listening and reading together. Here's the issue. In education today, we focus heavily on literacy, and that's important. Reading is a learned skill, something we have to teach. But what about listening? Listening is natural, right? We're born with the ability to hear and understand, but in reality, deep listening is a skill that also needs to be cultivated, and we're losing that skill. Now think about this. While schools are teaching students how to read, students are spending more time than ever online, skimming information, scrolling through snippets of text, and bouncing between tabs. It's no wonder students are losing the ability to focus deeply, not just when reading, but when focusing and listening, trying to focus on listening to lectures, discussions, or even conversations. So let me jump in on the script here and get in between the AI and just point out that, again, even the AI is missing the point here. The problem isn't the learning of listening and learning of the reading. It's the focus on the importance of focus and attention in listening and reading and everything we do, right? Think about how we're actually, I could blame maybe TikTok or YouTube, that they have gone to shorter and shorter and shorter content, right? And I remember content creators complaining about this, that if they created a long form podcast, that they got punished for it because YouTube wanted 2-minute, 60-second little videos. So it's actually breeding worse and worse attention spans into the audience, right? It's a form of audience capture, but in this case, you're destroying your audience ability to even focus, right? So let's move on here. So here's my take. If we want to address the attention crisis in education, we need to rethink how we're teaching. We have to focus on both reading and listening because they're connected. It's not just about getting kids to read more or better. It's about teaching them how to focus, how to engage deeply, whether they're reading a novel or listening to a lecture or just listening to themselves and looking inside themselves. Audiobooks are a perfect example. They engage the brain in ways that foster focus and comprehension. They don't just build listening skills. They develop the same kind of attention and critical thinking that reading does. I'm going to get to that. By incorporating more listening-based learning into curricula like audiobooks or podcasts alongside traditional text, we can help students rebuild their ability to concentrate, which is crucial for both reading comprehension and active learning. No, that's the AI misunderstanding. That's not my solution. My solution is give the kids audiobooks, physical books, and ebooks. Because, as example, I like physical books. They're nice to read, but they're very difficult. Audiobooks is what I will usually use to grok the majority of the information. If I want to highlight specific and pull text, there's where the ebooks come in. Right? Very convenient to search within the text for a particular section. Right? But nothing better than a physical book for making notes and right? As Carr and Wolf both talk about, the book allows you to be focused directly in on the content and the subject. So if you make a note, even if it's in a commonplace book, outside of the book, instead of making marginalia, you still stay somewhat focused, where the argument is the internet allows you to be so much more distracted. But I argue that my protocol would include things like what we've learned from Jewish children, that they tend to be better at learning, right? IQ. And the argument is what I recommend as a protocol. I've said this for a long time and only recently found out this is how young Jews learn. I've argued what we need to do is pair off our students. So we take the physical textbook or the audios. For me, what I would do would be to listen to the audiobook. Then I would follow along on the physical book. And in a partner, what I recommend is to pair off. This is exactly how the Jews learned. You pair off, and you're actually learning from each other. So I would take turns. One student reads to the other student. Then they discuss comprehension, critical analysis. Then the other student reads to that student. And they go back and forth like that. And I argue that's how you become really good at this. And it's been shown by some of the data, which I find funny that they didn't look at this. They didn't look at some of the IQ tests of these young Jews. Or honestly, even it's been talked about with Asians as well, where they take education much more seriously. But is this a surprise when our students balk at 30 minutes of homework when, trust me, we all know they should be spending at least 30 minutes reviewing what they learned that day, never mind additional homework. So there's a big disconnect between, honestly, the value of education in our minds. And I think the real root here is engagement. We need to understand that we need to get our kids engaged. And that's why I think pairing off as children, they begin to value the education because they start to actually feel like they're learning as opposed to being taught. You get the difference, right? So I proceed. So it says, we are in an era where the skills of listening and deep reading are more important than ever. If we want students to thrive in a world of constant distraction, we need to build an education system that teaches them how to listen, how to read, and most importantly, how to think. Well, that's it for today. Today's episode of The Learning Shift. Just ignore that. Thanks for tuning in. If you like today's topic, be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts on how listening and reading should be part of education reform. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning. Right? I could even go further and say, keep engaged and keep learning. But so it says here, this script provides a clear, engaging presentation of the thesis while making it conversational and suitable for a podcast format. And I've told him I like to keep it conversational. I'm not a fan of these Poindexters who like to use big words just to sound. Right? So I gave it another prompt. My prompt was, my morphology is learning from Wolf that listening, this is where this idea comes from. Listening is natural, but reading is a skill we must learn. And also Paivio's dual coding. This is a theory about how we learn. I learned for myself that getting better with audiobooks, focus and comprehension leads to better skills in all areas of reading and even learning. And further to Carr's insights, I've realized that my focus on listening to audiobooks while I do almost any other task, adjusting whether I have 2 ears in or 1 ear, adjusting the volume, adjusting the speed based on what I'm doing. But what I've realized is it's not multitasking. It's actually challenging the focus, right? So when I'm on my walks, it's not an extreme challenge to listen into an audiobook and keep all distractions out of mind and out of I was going to say out of eyesight, but you know what I mean. Try to keep yourself from being distracted by the world around you. It's hard at first, but then that becomes much easier. And then honestly, I've become able, and this sounds crazy, but I've become able to watch mindless media while I still listen to my audiobooks, right? It's hard to go into, but it's a matter of focus and comprehension first. It's not the reading, it's not the listening, right? Reading is focus. Focus is reading. Reading is wisdom. I had this whole progression here. It just seems pretty clear to me, but I progressed. So this is its response to what I just said there. It said, it sounds like you're really integrated. It sounds like you are really integrated. Oh, jeez. I hate these. So I hate that the AI, it's like data from, what do you call it? It's like it learned. It's absolutely what it is. It's like one of these AI programmers watched too much Star Trek: The Next Generation. You remember that whole trope that Data refused to use contractions, like he would say, you have. But there's the reason right there. Because contractions really aren't conducive to data transfer, right? They're just a lazy shortcut for most of us English people. And again, what's funny is the whole reason why Nicholas Carr says our education and our focus is failing and our comprehension is failing is very similar to Marianne Wolf, and is exactly that. It's that rather than it be words that I can recognize, it sounds like you have really integrated insights from. It stops you just like a hyperlink, and you have to decode. You have, as right? Like, and this is my dyslexic brain, right? Because I recognize words, I don't pronounce them out. So I can get that very extreme break from the focus of reading that I noticed that maybe goes under your what's the term there, right? You don't notice it for the average person. So it sounds like you have really integrated insights from Marianne Wolf and Paivio's dual coding theory into your own learning experience, using audiobooks to improve focus and comprehension, which then enhances reading and overall learning, is a powerful discovery. It ties directly into the idea that listening is more innate, while reading is a skill that needs to be developed. Paivio's theory suggests this: as engaging both visual and auditory processing, it can strengthen memory and understanding. Your personal experience adds a compelling layer to these theories, showing how focusing on listening can improve a broader range of cognitive skills. Exactly. And so I just gave it a simple prompt. I said, that's true mindfulness. And it misunderstood it, and it just gave me a little definition as to what mindfulness is. Right? And it says, at its core, true mindfulness is about embracing the present as it is, fostering a sense of acceptance and openness to whatever arises, and finding balance in the flow of life's experiences. No, it is not. There's a perfect example of how you have to know the answer already to be able to use AI for education, for insight, for reading, for learning. because it's wrong. What I was pointing at is true mindfulness is exactly what he wrote above, or he or she, whatever the AI you want to, it's actually the opposite. It's not embracing the present as it is, fostering a sense of acceptance and openness to whatever arises. It's the opposite. It's not just acceptance and openness to whatever. It's active engagement with whatever arises. It's not just embracing the present as it is. It's actively engaging with the present as it truly is, being aware so that you're able to be present and engage truly. This is what Jung was talking about, that the vast majority of the evil that's suffering in this world can be traced to the fact that we are simply lazy and we walk about and act completely, utterly unconscious the vast majority of the time. And this is where this problem comes in, right? Because how can you find a balance in the flow of life's experiences if you're not engaged, if you're not present or aware or focused? This is Nishitani's basho in Japanese. It's the Japanese character that represents place, but it points out that there's two kinds of places, right? There's a place inside of you, the warrior, ready and prepared for action. Then there's the place of action, right place, right time. This is what we're missing. We're missing the focus, the mindfulness, the awareness that we usually used to develop in us through reading, right? How many people, I just saw a gentleman who has a cat that sleeps with him every night when he reads, and everyone else says, oh, that's cute, and the cat. But for me, the shock was, wow, there's still people that read at night before they go to bed. Right? Honestly, there was a survey recently that went around and asked people about the books they read. They didn't read any books. In fact, Nicholas Carr even quotes an archaeologist or an academic, a scholar of some kind, who claims that I don't need to read books anymore. Why would I? When I can just read the Blink List, or I can just ask AI or Google to give me the salient points. Well, the reason why is, as I've just shown you, true mindfulness, AI thinks, is what an author called McMindfulness. What AI thinks mindfulness is, or what the West thinks mindfulness is the opposite of what it is. It's actually they think it's to be disengaged. When true mindfulness is, yes, it's an acceptance, but it's much closer to an embracing of whatever arises, the good and the bad, as ordered. Nietzsche's Amor Fati, love your fate. And this is, I guess, as a final, this is how I think it comes full circle. That Nietzsche, one of our first psychologists, was teaching us how to manage the trauma of life. And he was teaching us about education. There's a few quotes that I don't have at hand here, but this is exactly what Nietzsche was saying. That if we didn't continue to engage with these important questions, that eventually we may no longer have the skills to even question, let alone engage with these questions. So on that, I'll leave it. Geez, I can't believe how long I can make some of these things. I apologize. Remember, though, if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, you can always listen to it in pieces because it does save your spot. You can listen to it 10 minutes at a time. I also recommend increasing the speed of podcasts you listen to. Probably not as much with mine because I'm a pretty fast talker already. But I find most podcasts speak so slowly that, what was the podcast I was listening to recently? Can't remember, but it was 45 minutes long, but I was able to listen to it at 3 times speed. So it was like, wow. Thanks for the 10-minute podcast. But I digress. I guess I'm of the opinion that the only way to overcome a short attention span is by listening longer. I mean, seriously. Like, I run into that all the time when I'm talking, say, on Discord, And I have people that are like, oh my God, I love your ideas, but like, can you get to the point sooner? I'm like, seriously, dude. Like, so what do you want me to do? Like, do you want me to tell you the answers without explaining how it's relevant? Or do you want to learn the patience to focus?